danke vielmals für die schöne Einleitung. Ich werde jetzt zum Englischen switchen, auch damit wir es sozusagen der weiteren Verbreitung zuliebe. Okay, so very soon there will be electronic organ here, and we have here a copy of an instrument, a 14th century instrument, so we already see kind of the situation that we are in. But I would like to start even earlier with my presentation, and I play to you very few seconds of some sounds. I think we all have heard this, like creatures that are a little bit similar to the one that we see up there produce them. These are whale songs. Other creatures that are also producing interesting music are these are lemurs singing, and of course one very important thing that we always encounter is any kind of white noise, exemplified by, for instance, waterfalls. So when we regard our natural environment, we are confronted with these kind of two extreme situations. On the one hand, we have white noise, we have this glissandi, and on the other hand we have this almost sine wave like notes produced by birds, for instance. So this is kind of the complexity of sounds that we are living in, and I find it very interesting that what any system of music theory, particularly a system of organizing sound material, has to do is to find a way of dealing with this complexity of available sound and put them into some kind of order, or impose an intellectual structure onto them in order to make them accessible. So how can we, in this boundless abundance of different sounds, get a handle on the material that is around us? In order to be able to work with it, we need some system of categorization. And this is exactly what tuning systems are doing. They are trying to take the abundance of available musical material and put them in a particular order. They are looking for ways of capturing the most ephemeral process of oscillating molecules that we perceive as sound in mathematical terms and descriptive language. Tuning systems function like grammars or linguistic rules imposing structure upon the infinite. And this is also something that basically all endeavors, artistic endeavors in the history of art have in common. We are kind of confronted with this abundance of different things, and we have to find a way of dealing with them, of finding categories with them. And as in very common in our culture, we always start with the Greek antiquity as a main reference point for us. And here is a little quote of Plato's dialogue Philebos. It's exactly the quote that I will read. And he writes, "Opposed to the unlimited is the category of the equal and double, and everything with which puts an end to the differences between opposites and makes them commensurable and harmonious by the introduction of number. And in the acute and the grave, the quick and the slow, which are unlimited, the addition of these same categories, like limited, unlimited, creates a limit and thereby establishes the whole art of music in all its perfection." And again, in the case of cold and hot weather, the introduction of these categories removes the excess of indefiniteness and creates moderation and harmony. And thence arise the seasons and all the beauty, by mixture of the infinite with the finite. This goddess, my Philebus, beholding the violence and universal wickedness which prevailed, since there was no limit of pleasure or of indulgence in them, established law and order which contain a limit. You say she did harm, I say on the contrary, she brought salvation. So, we could summarize this in a way that beauty is opposed to the formless unboundedness of the Chthonian and brutal nature. It is delineation and discrimination. Nature is full of beauty, but it is not beautiful. Beauty can be found in nature, can be distilled out of nature through the act of discrimination. Beauty comes from making the boundless through the act of delineating measurable and commensurate. Beauty comes from defining limits in space and time. The statue made of stone has a very clearly defined spatial form. The glissando of the animal world becomes a scale. The ever-changing nature is frozen and forced into stillness, and this combination or reconciliation of these opposites, of the infinite and the finite in art, is for Plato the origin of beauty. Plato was a Pythagorean, and for Pythagoreans, mathematics described the structure of the cosmos and defined the laws of beauty by means of numbers. As we've seen, beauty draws lines, it discriminates. It is discrete numbers that make limits and beauty definable. Numbers make order perceivable, they represent order and make order easily reproducible. Thus, they cannot only be used to define clearly the laws of beauty, but the idea of beauty is always linked to the concept of numbers. We can see here a famous depiction of Pythagoras in Raphael's schools of Athens, and we see that he holds in his hand this famous table with the tetractys, the numbers 1 to 2 to 3 to 4, and the second version of is 6 to 8 to 9 to 12, which served as the basis for music theory and all tuning systems from the early Middle Ages until around 1550. And one of the key figures in this process of developing this tuning system was the person that you can see on the left, Guido of Arezzo. in his Micrologus from 1025, he gives a detailed explanations how to construct, with the help of a monochord, a musical system using only the numbers 1 to 2 to 3 to 4, or the tetractys, to define all the proportions of all the intervals of the system. We call this system today Pythagorean tuning. And this system was prevalent for almost 1,000 years, we have to say, no? Between 500 and 15. I mean, it's of course never clearly, I will talk about it later. So all the intervals that are used to construct the system and all the intervals that might be used in musical practice as consonants and are intervals that are pure, that are taken from the overtone series, like 1 to 2 to 3 to 4, and we could, so all simultaneously sounding notes are pure intervals. And the tuning system itself looks like this. So you can see the proportions up there, and the sense, sense in sense the same thing. The problem is that now I would really need the organ to present it. Okay, but let's continue. So here are like examples. This is by Leonin from 1160, and what you can easily see is that whenever there are two notes fall on a beat, you will see perfect consonants, which are fifths and octaves and fourths. No? Like in the first bar, starts with an octave, second D. Then the second bar is a fifth, and then there is this dissonance, but it's kind of dissolved into goes down into the E. But so you see all the musically important points in this composition, and we can go on, are always fifths or fourths or octaves. The next example, this is by Perutinus, and this is a three-part construction, also from the 12th century. And if you see the beats, you will also see that that all the beats are either octaves, fourth, or fifth, or a combination of these. No, so. What for me is so important is that we can now clearly see the connection between the theoretical tuning system and the compositional practice. So all the compositional decisions, so what should be consonant and dissonance, they are directly derived from the tuning system. It's not a kind of, let's say, by chance that there are only fifths and fourths, but this is a direct result of the tuning system. And when we, I mean, as you can see, there is already one one B flat, but basically the compositional structure of this piece and the previous piece is based on a diatonical system, as the system I prefer. But already Guido of Arezzo enlarged the system to 12 notes by second per octave, and it was usually in the 13th century until the 14th century tuned in, or could be interpreted as this series of fifths. So starting with the E flat and ending with the G sharp, we have this series of fifths. And the interesting feature, or it's just a mathematical necessity, is that the system, this Pythagorean tuning system, is not it's not forming a closed circle, but it's open. So the 12th fifth is called Wolf fifth, and is because it is 23.5 cents too small. Now I see something right. Yeah, perfect entrance moment. For the time being, we're still in the Pythagorean realm, so I can now show this. Here it's a perfect fifth, no? Again a perfect fifth. Okay, this is the last one. And then this is the Wolf's fifth, no? So this is between G sharp and E flat. You have this kind of interesting sound interval that didn't enter musical practice, so to speak. If we now look, this is the whole system again. Yeah. And here is the explanation for this strange fifth. No? If you take 12 fifths and compare them to 7 octaves, you will get this very nice 531,441 to 524,288 interval, which is actually 23 cents. But I think it's interesting to understand that people for centuries they had to deal with these numbers, no? I mean, now with cents it's so easy, but they had, for centuries, they had to deal with these strange numbers in order to calculate their intervals. And if we now look at another example, so this is Robert's Bridge Codex, so one of the earliest organ music that survives. Interval which is the perfect fifth. This was from 1360. This is a little bit later from the Codex Chantilly, 1382, by Jacob Senlèche, and this is what we call ars subtilia nowadays, so very complex rhythmical structures. But when you see, when you look at the harmonic structure, you see it starts with the fifth. Next bar is octave. Fifth. So even though we have a very complex melodic structure and a very complex rhythmical structure, the main impulses, the main beats are always strictly fifth. But then, in about around 1400, of course in this period it's very hard to give precise timing, something very interesting happened. And to illustrate this, I will play you a little piece on the other instrument. It's a Kyrie from Codex Finds, also 14th century music. piece that sounds very different from the pieces that we have heard before, and I think it's very striking that that we have such a huge amount of thirds in this piece, no? So even though the tuning system is actually a Pythagorean system, but the interesting thing that happened was that in the 14th century, okay, I can show you. So this is the piece that I played. What happened in the 14th century was that the Wolf fifth changed its position within the circle of fifth. So instead of being situated between G sharp and E flat, it was situated between B and F sharp. You can remember. Sorry, where's the mouse? Oh, here. You can remember in this piece, in this Roberts Bridge Codex, we see in bar 6, for instance, and bar 5, there is a fifth between B and F sharp. So it means that it's impossible that it was tuned in a way that the Wolf fifth was between B and F sharp, but it was definitely between G sharp and E flat. But in the Codex Fancy piece, as I said, we can find many treatises from Italy from this period of time that, or not many, but some that clearly show the shift of the Wolf fifth. And the interesting thing is now that any chromatic pure Pythagorean system contains, so to speak, as a byproduct, nearly pure major thirds. And what you see here is the explanation for that, no? So the ninth tone of a series of 8 consecutive pure fifths is 4 octaves and nearly pure minor sixth higher than the starting tone. No? And this is exactly what you see here. I can give you the math if you want, so that's the same in calculated. So you see the second is basically the same, it's just an octave transposition, and you see the interval that results is 384 cents. And the other thing that this system produces, that is of course closely connected, is we have pure minor thirds. 3 pure minor thirds. Basically, it's the same principle that produces them. This is you see this the calculation. That's how you can calculate them, and so you get in the Pythagorean system with a fifth between B and F sharp, exactly these pure thirds. And I find it very fascinating because when we again go back to the score and look what thirds are used by the composer, you will see it's exactly these thirds, no? So, like in the second line, we have the G sharp and B, which is one of the pure minor thirds. Then in the next line again, B and G sharp. So it's always this one, and then in the bottom line you have A, C sharp, which is also one of the pure thirds, and so on. So you can go through the piece and through the whole codex, and then it's quite clear that this piece was written with this kind of tuning system in mind, no? And it's so interesting because this is something that obviously resulted from the musical practice, because the treatises, the tuning system treatises from this era, they didn't theoretically justify the major thirds because they still stuck to the Pythagorean system, and in the Pythagorean system you don't have thirds. The third just doesn't exist as an interval because it ends with the octave, no? And so we have this interesting phenomena that for maybe 150 years, we don't know precisely. There's a strange disconnection between the actual musical practice that used the thirds and the theoreticians who insisted on the Pythagorean system. When we look at this picture, this is you can find this in the Cathedral of Assisi, and it's a wooden inlay depicting an organ, and this was made around 1490 or something like this. And when you first it doesn't seem strange, but if you start to look very closely, you will see that something is different. We can see that there are between the E and the F, there is an additional E, or an additional key at least, no? And of course, it's not. And I think it's quite clear that this is not just a complete, let's say, misunderstanding of visual artists concerning music, but it's made on purpose because we also have records for this. And the interesting thing is that this second E was used as a pure third to C, no? So that you had in this modal system also a pure third on C that would lead to F, basically, no? And so we have interesting, because you might think, okay, maybe we add another other key to close or to remove the Wolf fifth or something like that. No, but the purpose was to create another pure third. and we also start to see tuning systems, but just practical tuning systems, not theoretical, just people who tell how to tune, not justifying it theoretically, that tell the musicians to actually tune these major thirds, like actively tune other intervals than fifth. No, for 1,000 years people only tuned fifths and fourths, and now people say no, you can also use major thirds or minor thirds, pure thirds to tune. When we look at music from this period of time, for instance, here we have a piece by Guillaume Dufay, and what we can see here is that I wrote this harmonic structure here, and so when we and not on fifth as the previous piece. So we see this very interesting shift in exactly this around 1400. I mean, I think I don't know when this piece was written, but something like 1420 or something like this. No, so we have this shift between fifths and thirds in not just in the tunings, like in the practical tuning, in the tuning system, but you can also see it in the compositional practice. So the third became used as a standard interval, but still there was no theoretical explanation for the third. No? The third was still some kind of an alien to the music theoreticians. And you've realized I've already played this example not in Pythagorean tuning, but in a tuning that was developed afterwards. And this is the so-called, as you all know, mean tone temperaments. Mean tone. And so obviously from these scores and many other scores, and we can see that some form of mean tone temperament was already used, but we didn't have any theoretical justification yet. And the person to theoretically justify the usage of thirds was Giuseppe Zarlino. And sorry, okay, this was another piece by Ockeghem, but it doesn't matter. And this, what you can see here, is his justification for the usage of thirds. He said that he developed something that he called the scenario, and it's kind of the equivalent to the tetractys. The tetractys contains the numbers 1 to 2 to 3 to 4, which gives fourth and fifth. And the scenario goes further up in the partial series from 4 to 5, 5 to 6. And so we have here these intervals, and you can also see like the all possible intervals. It's just a beautiful graphic, but in the center on this ring you see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, which is the number proportions that he started to use in his thing. The interesting thing is in his book Institution Harmonicae from 1558, he also explains why he would like to use them, and he just comes with a lot of speculative thoughts about the structure of the universe and the Bible and so on. And he never says something like, I think major thirds really sound nice. That's really below his level of dealing with music. No? And this is, my favorite explanation is that the number 6 is one of the perfect numbers. So it has a very specific mathematical features, and it's a great number. And he says, and he's in there quoting Augustinus, he says that the number 6 is not holy because God created the world in 6 days, but the other way around, God created the world in 6 days because the number 6 is so great. And so this was his justification for this type of thought justified his the change of tuning system, but not the practical thing. No? So again, we see a tuning system, and when we look at the music of this period of time, we see that the rules for counterpoint, the question what is consonant, what is dissonance, completely conforms with the new tuning system. So the thirds become consonants, so also the counterpoint rules allow thirds and not just fifth and fourth and octaves. And in his theoretically, Zarlino really wanted to include only perfect, just intonation intervals, so to speak, based on this scenario. And so the question is, how could he construct a system of only pure intervals as a musical system, a kind of just intonation system that contains on the one hand pure fifths and pure thirds? I mean, this was the basic problem. And he was not the first to think about it, but 1529 Lodovico Folignano published his Musica Theoretica, and there Folignano gives this kind of tuning system. I think you're familiar, like the horizontally are the pure fifths and vertically are the pure thirds. No? And so he created this system, and here you can see the same system in sense, so that you can have an idea of how it was built. And what you see, what is very striking, is that in order to solve the conflict between the pure thirds and the pure fifths, there are 2 Ds and 2 Bs, B flats, no? In the system. No? You see D minus K, so minus 1 comma, and the ordinary D, and then the B plus 1 comma and the ordinary B flat, sorry. So this was kind of a predecessor of Zarlino. Zarlino then defined his own, so to speak, just intonation keyboard and system, and it's basically the same, it's just a little bit expanded, and again we have 2 Ds, we have 2 E flats, and so on. So you see several keys are doubled in order to create the opportunity to play pure thirds and pure fifths. And in order to really play it, Talino had constructed a keyboard, and now we are entering, let's say, the world of what we are interested in, the idea of creating split keyboards, or keyboards with split keys, let's put it. And so you can see how this was meant to be used. Several black keys are split, and the D's of the white key row is also split. But as far as I understand, this was only meant. This keyboard was basically just like a tool to a theoretical tool. It was never used in actual performance. No? There's no music that was actually written for this keyboard. And there have been like similar instruments throughout the centuries, but also in this period of time by people like Francisco de Salinas, Galeazzo Sabatini, Joan Albert Ban, Marin Mersenne, Descartes, Van der Elst, Valentini, and so on. So we have lots of these kind of instruments that were then also actually built, where you have keyboards that are functioning as, so to speak, just intonation keyboards, where you can only play pure intervals. So, and this drawing is, as I said, from 1588 or something like this. So. Now, as I said, Talino had to solve somehow the conflict of pure thirds and pure fifths in one system, and a keyboard like this was not really practical. So he tried to come up with a new way of tuning instruments, and he had could use some new mathematical methods that were developed or that were found in the 16th century, and he was able with this geometric method to actually split an interval equally. That's something that was very difficult before they discovered this new methods by Waller. Yeah. Okay. So the most important step that Talino made was that he decided, in order to keep pure thirds, to diminish the size of the fifth. And what is so interesting in the history of tuning systems is that this is basically the first time that somebody tells you to detune a perfect interval. Huh? Until like 1,500 years or even longer, people always tuned pure intervals. But now he said, okay, in order to create a system, we have to consciously tune intervals less than perfect. And I think that's a huge step in the way of thinking about tuning systems. And so what he came up with were several tuning systems where the fifths were diminished by a third comma, a seventh comma, and so on. And the most important tuning system was the quarter comma mean tone temperament, which meant that the each fifth was 1/4 lower than the pure fifth, but the benefit of this was to get pure major thirds. And this is, let's say, the most famous mean tone temperament. This is the chart, so you can see on the very right hand all the fifths are out of tune, but you have all these pure major thirds. Usually the system was tuned in this way, and now I can also demonstrate this to you here on the keyboard. So we have, so this is a pure major third, C, E, and this is the fifth. You hear it's slowly beating, no? We go higher, so in order, but the major third, as we have seen, the third became so prominent that the third was so important that they accepted the fifth to be a little bit worse in order to have this beautiful pure thirds. And so we have, so this is the system, but again we have a problem. So there is this wolf fifth again, and so this is again a system that doesn't close the circle of fifth, and so this is like the circle, and so what was resulting from this problem was that when you had tuned your keyboard, you had always to decide whether you wanted to have a sharp or a flat. And this is the basic standard tuning was you didn't have a D flat, but you had a G sharp. You didn't have a D sharp, but the E flat, and so on. So this was the standard keyboard tuning. And now people thought, okay, it would be actually nice to be able to transpose things and also to play more chords. And again, they came up with an idea that we've already seen. They started to split keys. So in order to have also a B, an A flat, they put in a second key between the G sharp and the A. And we can now see this is from a vocal order from Vienna, the keyboard. So you see this is a D sharp and this is a A flat. So they added two more keys to the 12-tone keyboard. This is another keyboard. This is from Daniel Herz organ from Brixen. And you see there are even more keys. No? Almost all the black keys are split. So this would give you a system with 70 notes per octave. And then the final step is also already mentioned by Talino in his Instituzione Enharmoniae from, as I said, 1558. And here we can see even 19 pitches per octave. This would be, this is a similar instrument. This was mentioned by Praetorius in his Syntagma Musicum. Again, it's the same system. You see, I don't know if it's possible, but the black keys are always split, and then there is always a small black key between E and F and B and C. So this is the same keyboard or same type of keyboard. So it's a 19-key keyboard. And then we can even see, so here, this is from 74. It's by Johann Baptist Samba. It's a Manuductio ad Organum. And so here he even spelled out how the keys are to be tuned. So and it's interesting, like the first mention of this was of this 19 keys per octave was 1558, and this is 1704. So it's like 150 years around, so to speak. And as I think this is especially interesting for Austrian music because also Praetorius mentioned that this instrument was built in Vienna for Carolo Luiton, the chamber organist of the Habsburg Emperor Rudolf II. This is from Salzburg, and when we so we have a lot of instruments in this Habsburg area, so to speak, and when you look at the tuning of this keyboard, if it's tuned now in not quarter comma but third comma mean tone temperament, which means that if each fifth is 1/3 of the comma lower, like about 7 cents. So this is the calculation of. If you now take 19 of these fifths, the circle of fifth is closing. So you have, with these 19 keys and the third harmonic tone temperament, you have a tuning system where you can actually play all the keys. And we can see this in, for instance, this very famous sonata by Georg Muffat for violin and harpsichord, where he actually really goes through all the keys. And we can here even see these interesting places where he kind of commutes from B sharp to C. No? So this, they are 1 comma apart, and it's actually notated in the violin part, because So and you see all this strange like F sharp major and so on. But you can also see you have F sharp major and even C sharp major in works by Bieber or by Schmelzer. So in this Austrian Baroque music, you find lots of these far remote keys already. And my suggestion is that they were very much meant to be played on this kind of 19 split keyboard instruments, or at least 17, it depends. The problem is many of these instruments haven't survived, and we only have these kind of few instruments, and then like just sources, literal sources that are describing them. And of course we have scores, and from scores we can try to understand how they might have been performed. Okay, so another, so this will be the last point now. Another thing that happened during the 16th century was that the people, much in the same way, or let's say they tried to revive antiquity. They went back to Greek sources, and they were translated for the first time. But I find it interesting that much in the same way Columbus made a colossal mistake traveling to India when he thought he found a route to India, and I think very much the same happened to these people. They thought they were traveling to Greece, but basically they discovered something completely different that didn't have much to do with Greek music. But nevertheless, it was a very important thought, and maybe the most important person to do that was Vicentino. He wanted to revive the Greek music to modern practice, and designed a specific, let's say, musical system in order to achieve this. And his starting point was basically the quarter comma mean tone temperament. And in the quarter comma mean tone temperament, you have always, as I said, the gap between the D sharp and the E flat and so on. And now this comes the big moment where we might hear this even. So we have here the D and the E, no? So it's a kind of a small 193 mean tone. And then when you go higher from the D to the D flat, let's go to the, So you have here the interval between the D flat and the D sharp and the E flat. And this is approximately 38.6 cents. And so his starting point was this series here of, and then he just filled the gap. So instead of having just this fifth of a whole tone in the middle between D sharp and E flat, he also added one between D sharp and the little bit higher D, and between the E flat and a little bit higher E flat, so that he split the whole tone into 5 equal parts. And then he continued to identify this with the old Greek, or use this interval that he identified with the enharmonic diesis and wanted to construct the old Greek general diatonical, chromatical, and enharmonic by just placing, let's say, the notes on different slots of this general unit of the enharmonic diesis of about 39 cents. So this was, and from there on he started to build up a whole composition. See, I don't want to go into detail with this. It gets very complex, and it basically never. He wrote some sample compositions for that, but basically this was never really used in music except for like very few pieces. But he also built instruments, and in order to build instruments, he designed a way of tuning these instruments, and so he came up with this cycle of 31 fifths, and these fifths are all mean tone temperament fifths, so they're all too small. And he realized that when he goes up 31 fifths with this slightly too small fifth, he can also close the gap, so there's no Wolf's fifth anymore. This is the math for this, no? So you have 31 fifths, and you can just see this, no? So you can easily calculate this. There are some small deviations, but if you think of like if you have this small deviation spread out of over 18 octaves or 56 thirds, I mean, you can imagine that this doesn't play any role practically, no? So he had basically a system with 31 pitches per octave, and now he had to find a way of implementing this on a keyboard instrument. And this was his solution. This is one of his instruments, the Organon, and this other instrument here is the archicembalo. They have basically both the same layout. It's just like the one is an organ, the other is a cembalo, but it's basically the same type of instrument. And now, if we look at how this was tuned, so this is basically how the keys were tuned. And what is interesting in his system is then when you look, it's ordered in rows. So when you look at of course the white keys are just the standard white keys. Then if you look at the first row of split keys, you have C sharp, E flat, F sharp, G flat, D. So the standard mean tone temperament. So if you play only the first two rows of keys, you can just play like any other mean tone temperament organ. If you move up one row, you see you have basically a mean tone temperament system of 19 pitches per octave. And then the same applies. So the first, the first manual up is basically a copy, as you see, of the second manual copy, but it's just from 38.7 cents higher, no? And yeah, I know. No, this is now almost the end. After so we had this kind of instrument, and then other people also built similar instruments. One of these was by Trasutino. It has also 31 keys per octave, and so on. So what we can see, and this is my conclusion, that at around 1600, the composers had very much the same four choices that we have today. They can use the idea of they could use the idea of just intonation, like Fogliani or Zarlino in one of his. They can use incomplete non-circular tuning systems and push the limits as far as you want. then the rebirth of Greek modes, or like defining some strange new modal structure, no? And of course equal temperance tuning system. So all of these methods were already present in the 16th century. And what is so interesting is that they invested so much energy into this building split keys and making organs and harpsichords that you could think that this would have been the path forward. But interestingly enough, the history kind of abandoned all these ideas and went into a completely different direction by using well-tempered systems that finally led to the equal temperament of the 19th century. So the other thing, so history tells us that it's very hard to predict history, and it always moves in a way that we would never have thought it would move. And the other thing that is interesting is that usually systems are proved very successful if they were born out of a musical practice, like we've seen with the thirds. No? First, musicians and composers started to use this, and then somehow post factum, so to speak, Zarlino found a system of including this into a theoretical framework. And so I think this is also something that we can see very often, that things that are just made out of a conceptual idea of composers, for instance, like Vicentino's system, they usually don't really work very well in the wildlife of history, and it's very often systems that were first created by practice and then theoretically formulated that work. Something, for instance, I was very interested in, and another important thought for me is somehow, of course, we learned through Stockhausen and electronic music this idea of parametrization, so that we can order everything equally. But the question is always, is everything that we can order equally valuable, so to speak? No. So within a compositional system, do all the parameters really play the same role? And the same also applies to tuning. I mean, is it really so important to tune everything systematically so perfect? That's a very interesting question. I had a talk, was talking with Turkish musicians also, because there's one instrument that comes close to the piano, so to speak, it's the kanun, because it has strings that are pre-tuned, and you have little levers where you can change microtonally the pitches. But many of the musicians complained because for them these small deviations, they shouldn't be strictly measured, but this is something that they adds color during their performance, and they didn't want the systematization of them because they thought it would take away the main quality of their music. And with this I want to close my talk. Thank you very much, and yeah. So we have, if there's a question, we can, otherwise we just have a little break and then the first concert will start. Huh? Yeah.
Hello. Thank you so much. It was a great overview and a great intro. I just want to throw something in because I'm a musicologist. I'm always interested in like the longitude and view of how these things develop. And we very often hear that these ideas were sort of abandoned after the 16th century and then picked up again in modern music. But I think it's not completely true because there's a lot of knowledge that has to be like persistent. And I think at least I know of one missing link that is even after the 16th century and is sort of making, like closing a little bit this gap that we think is there between the old practice and its revival and modernity. And this is also related to the fact that instruments like compositional styles and techniques, they also travel, like they start to come up in one country, in one cultural context, and then it takes time for them to travel elsewhere. And I really like how you described that these instruments and these ideas can be traced from Italy, at first going to the Habsburg Empire. And I know of one example which is even later, that appeared in northwestern early. So, and it's an evidence that also these instruments and these ideas, they took time to travel, but there were still musicians and instrument makers interested in this. And there is one organ player, music theoretic, and church musician named Friedrich Suppick, who was living about at Johann Sebastian Bach's time, and he wrote a whole treatise, and he composed one of the very few known pieces that actually employ a 31-tone system. And so it's not very, very famous or not very well known, but it's just an interesting side fact that actually, I think to talk about a broken tradition is, it maybe is our view from today, but there must have been more people that preserve that kind of knowledge.
No, there are many things underneath our radar that happened in the 19th century also. It's just I just had I wanted to focus on one period of time, also because of the relation to the music that we're going to play. But of course, they have. I mean, also in the 20th century, early 20th century, we have so many instruments that were built. But what I wanted to say with this comparison is, Vicentina is somehow, with the exception of the mean tone temperament and some split keys, no system ever managed to get out of this kind of underdog existence. And it was always like people who were interested in it, they created it, but then it never managed to reach a wider interest, so to speak. No? So people were never able to communicate, or people were, on the other hand, people maybe were never interested enough into expanding into this direction. No?
Yeah. And so all the other people that were not reached by this innovation, if I interpret correct, what temperament were they in people?
When?
I mean, I think you just said that, they were making this sort of experiments, innovations, but it was rare that actually this innovation was actually spreading.
We see many of these instruments that were built by one person who was very much interested in that, and he and his friends. And so, like in the 19th century, people just kept playing the piano in equal temperament. And then, like in the 18th century, they had this well-tuned temperament. So it was just, there was a mainstream, and the mainstream just changed slowly. But this fringe area, so to speak, was quite kind of independent from this concept.
And it's also related to the social history of music. Like, it was extremely expensive to build these instruments, and it was always limited to chords or the rich people, high society. And so when so to say, a kind of popular music culture started to grow, and more people started to learn instrument,